Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Ketubot daf lamed vav, and we are, how far up? We're at the two dots at the near the bottom of lamed hey amud bet, and we're going to essentially talk about a new topic. I mean, not totally new, but related to what we're doing. We have been discussing the various situations where a woman is prohibited to the man, not allowed to marry her or not allowed to stay married to her. And yet, if he were to engage in to violate her, and he would have to still pay the fine. And the reason that that's a chiddush is because the language associated with it said that the language associated with the mitzvah requires the man to marry her and to not divorce her. So one might think that it would be that it would only apply where you're actually allowed to marry her, and yet we said in our last Mishnah that in fact it applies, notwithstanding the fact that it would be these relationships would be prohibited. We noted at that time, and we will come back to see now, that there are going to be some relationships, some Tanaim that allow or that say that the fine doesn't apply because we had the opinions that you actually do have to either be able to have a legally binding marriage or maybe even have a long-standing marriage and actually have to be able to stay married in order for the fine to apply. In any event, those were all situations where we said that the fine would apply. And now we're going to cite a brisa which tells us about situations where the fine does not apply. And then this brisa will lead us into the coming Mishnah, which will also discuss the same topic. Okay, so let's take a look. So we're at Tana Rabbanan, bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Bet. And it says, Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a brisa. So what does the brisa say? Arayot ushniyot la'arayot. So you have the category of arayot. That's in general. We'll see that it's not clear whether we're going to use that meaning here. Indeed, it probably is pretty clear very quickly that we're not going to use that meaning. But generally, arayot are the things that the relationships that the Torah tells us that you're not allowed to marry the person. You're not allowed to engage in marital relations with the person. And the second, the ushniyot la'arayot, secondary arayot, that refers to situations ordinarily that the rabbis prohibited. But we're going to see that probably can't be, because take a look and see what the next words are. Ein lahem lo knas v'lo pitui. That there's no fine associated with violating the woman, and there's no pitui, meaning that there's no both, whether you seduce the woman or actually engage in marital relations against her will, both of them trigger a fine for the man. And so whichever way it is, there is not going to be a fine for those situations. Hamima'enet, one who refuses. Now, the miyun, you may remember from our learning in Yevamot, we saw the category of miyun very frequently as we were learning Yevamot together, that category involves a woman whose father has passed away and is still a minor. And because of the situation for her and the degree of poverty that exists, the rabbi said, listen, we better allow her mother and brothers to marry her off. However, because it's only a rabbinic marriage, the woman, until she turns, and we'll see exactly that this is not a unanimous position, but until she turns at least 12, she's allowed to reject the husband. And so somebody who has been married to somebody, a girl who's been married to somebody and rejected her husband, also ein la lo knas v'lo pita. She also will not have a fine or for being violated, or a penalty for being seduced. Islandess, similarly, an islandess, that's somebody who is a woman who is not going to fully develop from a maturity standpoint to be able to have children. So again, and she goes from a ketana status all until the age 20, essentially, where the fact that she has not developed signs of maturity for a woman indicates that she is now considered an islandess. So that's the pattern that goes there. And so that situation, ein la lo knas v'lo pitui. Similarly, she will not receive the fine for being violated or a fine for being seduced. V'hayotzeis mishum shemra, and a woman who was taken out of her marriage because of or at least that's what we're assuming at the moment, that because of a bad name, namely that the day after the wedding, this is related to the very first Mishnah that we had in Ketubot, that the next morning the guy says, she didn't have her signs, she must have slept around, and so that also in her case, ein la lo knas v'lo pitui, she will not have any kind of fine or a payment for being seduced. So the first question that we need to deal with is, what are these arayot and secondary arayot? And let's explain. We'll explain clearly that it can't be the traditional explanation, because then we'll have a real problem with the secondary arayot. So my arayot, excuse me, hold on just a second. My arayot umay shniot la arayot ilema arayot, and now we turn to lamed vav amud aleph arayot mamish. Well, then shniot and shniot midivrei sofrim, that arayot, when we say arayot, we mean everything that the Torah prohibits as an arayas. So that and when we say shniot, that means that it's essentially rabbinic. Okay, and you can see in Rashi, arayot mamish hamafurash ba'acharei mot behein b'kritut, right? That these are things that are all subject to a penalty of kares or worse. All right, and they're listed in Parshas Acharei Mot. And shniyot, right? Shegazru chachamim al hashniyot, right? The rabbis created a gzeira on these. This is in Rashi. We're in the second Rashi, still the top line of Rashi on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, right? Shegazru chachamim al shniyot lehen leharchik min ha'aveira, right? That the point was to prevent coming close to a sin, because if we allowed them, maybe people would come and believe that even arayot would be permitted. You don't aim emo, like the grandmother, the aim aviv, the maternal grandmother, and the paternal grandmother. V'shara rayot hashnuyot b'perak sheni d'Yevamos. And so all the different other categories that we had in the second parak of Yevamos that we happened to learn before we learned Ketubot. So we had those detailed for us back then. But the point is that if that's true, Kevin de Oraisa Chazile, since she should be getting the penalty from the Torah, right? Because these are only rabbinically prohibited. Amai ein lahen knas. Why wouldn't she get the knas? She should get the knas if it's only if shniyot la'arayot means something that was only rabbinically prohibited. So Ella. So as a result, it can't be that. So Ella arayot. Chayave misus based. So it must be that the first category of arayot is the category of situations where you're chayav from based in. Shniyot chayav akrisos, and the secondary means that you're not chayav misa, but you're chayav kares. So and about chayav and lavin, but when it comes to a regular negative commandment, yesh lahen knas, then they would have a knas. No. We're rejecting the interpretation of shniyot as something that is rabbinical. Meaning we're rejecting the traditional distinction that we make between arayot and shniyot la'arayot, and we're saying that in this particular case, when we say arayot, we mean the relationships that would result in death, and shniot means the relationships that will result in karei. Okay, and so and umani, and who is that? Shimon HaTimni. That is Shimon HaTimni, and we saw, at the very beginning of this parak, right, that Shimon HaTimni, or maybe it was even the beginning of the previous parak, that Shimon HaTimni is the one who said that in order to have the prohibition, there needs to be a sufficiently legal marriage in order for there to be as long as you can legally get married, then we'll impose the fine. So actually, I think it was the beginning of this paragraph that we had this. So this is now, we're now 2 weeks into this parak or so, and so at the beginning of this parak, we're a little bit over a week into the parak. So at the beginning, about a week and a half ago now, we saw these opinions that differed with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that when it came to kares, right, we would impose a fine, and these are the opinions that say no. And the first opinion says no because you need to have at least a legally binding marriage, because of course the pasuk says that you have to marry her and stay married. So even though he would not allow the person to stay married, Shimon HaTimni says, listen, at least you have to have a theoretical possibility of marriage. And so as a result, a lav, when there's only a lav prohibition, marriage does exist. You are the court will recognize your effort to get married, and you will be required to get a divorce. You will have to have a get. So that's version number one. Ika da'amri. Alternatively, we can say arayot chayave misos beis-din v'chayave krisos. That actually arayot means that you're chayav misa from a court. That the court will impose death penalty, or you're chayav kares, or you're chayav that you'll be cut off from the Jewish people from Hashem, by Hashem. So, and shniyot chayav elav. And when it comes to shniyot, it doesn't mean, again, the classic definition, which would be rabbinic, but rather it means that something that is only prohibited with a lav. So for example, the classic lav is a kohen and a grusha. And so as a result, again, marriage is technically permitted, technically legal. It will be take legal effect, but you're not allowed to stay married. And so as a result, you would need to get divorced. And mani, and who would say that all of these categories would not get the fine? That would be Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. That would be Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, because again, there was this argument that we saw at the beginning of the parak between Shimon HaTimni and Shimon ben Manasseh as to whether or not, as to where we draw the line. The question is where do we draw the line of who gets the fine and who does not? And we saw three different versions. Version number one, which was our Mishnah, was that kares. Even if you get kares, as long as you're not getting misa, even if you get kares, you would still have to pay the fine. Version number two is no, misa and kares, you pay the fine. A lav, you don't pay a lav. I'm sorry, misa and kares, you don't pay the fine. A lav, you do pay the fine. And then the third version, and that was Shimon HaTimni's version, and the third version was Shimon ben Manasseh, who says that a kares, that misa, kares, and lav, all three, you don't pay the fine. And so therefore, the only thing that you would pay the fine for was a violation of a mitzvah aseh. So that would be, for example, somebody who violates the daughter of an Egyptian who is converted, or an Egyptian woman herself is converted, because it's before the third generation. They're not allowed to stay. You're not allowed to marry such a person until the third generation. Okay, so now the Gemara. Enlarge the group of women who will not receive a. So this is is shrinking the group of women that will receive a knas relative to our Mishnah that began the chapter. And so the Mishnah that began the chapter applied the fine to kares and to lav. Shimon HaTimni would only apply the fine to a lav, and Shimon ben Manasseh would not apply the fine to any of the three categories, not misa. Correct, expanding the group of women who do not receive.
Why is that good?
Well, again, it's not that it's good, it's that what's driving them is the fact that the Torah says with respect to somebody who violates the woman that they need to, that they marry her and they have to stay married to her. So in order to explain our Mishnah of how our Mishnah, which includes the situation of kares, where you can't even legally marry the person, the marriage doesn't even take effect. You don't need a divorce decree to marry if you were trying to marry somebody who is subject to a kares penalty and certainly a misa penalty. So we had to explain that there was a repetition of the word na'ara, I think 3 times, that triggered and that overrode the fact that it specifically mentions marriage. But for the two of them, for Shimon HaTimni and for Shimon ben Manasseh, the idea is as follows. Because it says, for Shimon HaTimni, it says that there's marriage involved. So there must be at least a legally binding marriage. So anything worse from kares and misa, since there's no legally binding marriage, we can't do it. It's just you're not able to fulfill any the certain aspect of that mitzvah. So it can't be that it's relevant. And for Shimon ben Manasseh, it goes a little bit further. If you can't actually marry a person and stay married to the person, then the whole issue must go away. Because the Torah tells us that if a person violates this woman, he needs to marry her and stay married to her unless she wants the divorce. He can't divorce her against her will. So therefore, if that marriage aspect doesn't apply, so then the fine shouldn't apply either. Because they're connected, because they're all part of the same rule. So that's what's driving Shimon HaTimni and Shimon ben Manasseh. They're not trying to exclude, they're trying to fit the words of the pasuk to our situation. Okay, so now the Gemara, so we made a number of statements. The first statement that we had in the Brisa talked about arayot and shniyat la'arayot. The second statement in our Brisa, the Brisa that we quoted to begin today, is hamima'enet ein la lo knas below pitoy, that a girl who performs miyun does not get any of these fines. So 1 second, what's the situation? The ordinary situation and the ordinary understanding of miyun is that we have a girl who's under 12, who has not yet become a na'ara, and she says, you know what, I don't want to stay with this husband that my brothers or mother married me off to. Well, the point is hakatana ba'alma isla. Well, that implies that what would be the sort of the reverse of this situation, right? To use the logical inverse, right? When is it that a minor child will not get the fine? It's only in the situation where the minor child was married to somebody and rejected the marriage, implying that an ordinary minor child would get the fine. But we saw that there was a debate about that issue. There was a debate between Rebbe Meir and the Rabbanan. That was the position of the rabbis. The Amri Katana Yeshla Knas. Remember, the rabbi said that a minor does get a knas as long as she's older than 3, because that's when the hymen will not regrow. And so as a result, if you take it away from her, the father is going to not be able to marry her off for as large a dowry or as large a deal as he might have otherwise. But then the problem is Ema Seifa. Now let's take a look at the next line. The next line is Islandus Ein La Lo Knas Lo Pitui. Then Islandus doesn't get anything. Well, why doesn't she get something? The presumption is because she never becomes a nara. She's a katana, right? A nara is somebody who is 12 years old and a day, meaning that she's experienced her 12th birthday, and she has 2 hairs. And so an islandess never has that physical development, and so she stays as a ketana until the age 20. And we saw that there was a debate on the precise age, but we'll use the age 20 for simplicity. And the point is that then she becomes a gedolah, but she's in the category, or a bogeret. She becomes an adult, but she is considered an islandess. And so that is Asa l'Rebbe Meir. That seems to follow Rebbe Meir. De Amar Katana Ein La Kanas, right? Because why is it that an islandess doesn't get a Kanas? It's because she never becomes the category of a Na'ara. She goes straight from Ketana to Bogeret. So V'ha mikatanusa yatsa salaveger, right? She goes directly from a minor, from a katana, until to the category of bogeret.
When does she become a bogeret?
What?
When is she, what? How old is?
There was a debate on it. There was a couple of different opinions. I think 18, 19, or 20, but the general understanding is that I think the majority opinion was 20. That we saw it, I believe, in Yevamot, but
Based on what?
What?
Physical characteristics, or
based on the absence of physical characteristics.
No. At what point? Why is that just an arbitrary?
Yes, that's in part of the reason why there's a debate about exactly what age that should be. But yes, that it is on some level arbitrary. I mean, I'm sure every opinion had some source to tie it to. But the point is that it's there's no physical development associated with it. The point is that at some point we need to call it call the situation and say that this is somebody who is in this category of not having physical development and unlikely to have children, and therefore is going to be somebody that people should not marry because that person's not going to have children.
No, I understand, but I mean, you could just say she's always a katana.
You could say she's always a katana. Yeah, I think they don't want to. You don't want to do that because that has legal ramifications, right? I mean, if she's always a katana, then her contracts aren't valid contracts. She doesn't have. She doesn't have. I don't know about the cigarettes, but the point is that she can't buy anything. The point is that we want her to have some legal status, legal adult status.
Right. Okay, it's interesting. Okay, I mean, is this these people, they never fit into the category, or is there something about the category that makes the crime, or that makes it worse? You know what I mean? Or like.
So no,
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know.
Technical legal thing, or is there some real reality behind this?
So for some, I think each case is a unique case. So for some of them, it's because, right, the whole purpose of the fine, as paternalistic and as not anachronistic or not consistent with sort of modern mores, but at the same time quite on some levels quite advanced for the time. But the point is that the fine is designed to recompense the father for his inability to effectively marry off the daughter. Well, the islandess is not going to be able to get married. Is not going to get married in the ordinary sense of the father marrying off the daughter, because in general you're not allowed to marry an islandess. And so as a result, the fine, there's less of a loss associated with it. So as a result, there's not as much of a reason to impose the fine. And similarly, in the girl who does miyun, presumably she had marital relations with her husband, even though she was at that time a kitana, and has now said that doesn't want to stay with her husband. But there's at least some probability that she did have marital relations, or will assume it, and we won't, and therefore, there's not going to be, associated with it the same negative ramifications. And then, of course, with respect to the marriage, it's the conversation that we had a few moments ago, which is that certain women don't fit in the category of being able to be legally married to the man that's involved. And so as a result, it's not because of anything about her. It's about the relationship. And we only, and again, according to Shimon HaTimni and Rav Shimon ben Menashe, you need to have a sufficiently, you have to have a sufficient potential legal relationship in order to have the whole category apply. So there are a couple of different categories for the reasons why the fine would not apply. But in the end, what we're saying here is Reisha Rabbanan v'Sefer Rabbi Meir, right? We have the Reisha seems to be like the rabbis, namely that a fine exists even as a minor, and the Sefer is Rabbi Meir, who says that no, we don't have the fine except for this Na'ara. And again, even there, right, the debate on some level is based on the Psukim itself, because the Psukim talk about a Na'ara. They don't talk about a Ketana. But the rabbis say, well, what's the principle? The principle is the loss of her virginity status. And so as a result, that would apply from the age of 3. So we're going to say that it applies from the age of 3. But note that everybody agrees that a bogeret doesn't get. So it's also has something to do with the fact that a na'ara and a ketana sort of remain in the father's house. Those are the moments in those days where the father would engage and take advantage of the opportunity to marry off the daughter and try to actually earn something as a result. So anyway, so that is the question. So now we're going to give what? No, an ordinary grusha would not get the fine. Well, an ordinary grusha usually is going to be somebody who's an adult. Right. So once you're a bogeret, you're not going to get the fine, even if you've never been married. So certainly an adult woman who has been married would not get the fine. So v'chitema kula Rabbi Meir. So, and if you want to say that really everything is Rabbi Meir, so we're going to give 4 possible explanations. So explanation number 1. And we're going to reject the first 2, and then the 3rd and the 4th are going to be possible. So if you want to say that it's really Rabbi Meir, now I mentioned when we raised the story of Miyun that actually it's not universal, that Miyun only exists until age 12, because Rabbi Yehuda is the one who disagrees and actually says that, you know what? Even after a girl turns to age 12, until she exhibits further signs of maturity, we are still going to allow her to engage in miyun and reject her husband. But the problem is, if we want to say that Rabbi Meir agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, there's a big problem. Umisavar law, but can Rabbi Meir really agree with Rabbi Yehuda? Because who's the bar plugda with Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa that teaches about the age of refusal? It is Rabbi Meir, because what do we say? Ad masai habas mima enes. Until when can a young girl engage in miyun? Ad shetavi shtes aros. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is the one who says until she brings the 2 hairs, meaning until she goes from the category of ketana to na'ara, she's allowed to do miyun. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, she needs further maturity. She needs to have more than just 2 hairs. It needs to be a greater sense of maturity. So as a result, we still are stuck with the Reisha is the Rabbanan. The rule associated with Miyun seems to be consistent with the rabbis, because it implies that a girl age 12 and under would get the fine. And the Seifa, the story of the islandess, seems to be like Rabbi Meir. So Ella Rabbi Yehuda. So okay, so let's say it's Rabbi Yehuda. We can, and of course that will work out nicely, because now if Rabbi Yehuda says that a girl can engage in miyun even when she is a na'ara, so now both situations could require a na'ara status. Ufakatana savar like Rabbi Meir, and maybe he holds like Rabbi Meir that a ketana cannot get it. And so as a result, when we say that miyun exists, we're talking about miyun by a na'ara. And when we're talking about or the na'ara who may have performed miyun before, but now she's a na'ara. And when we're talking about I mean, we're talking about when that she could perform miyun even as a nara, because that's Rabbi Yehuda's position. And when it comes to the situation of a islandess, he holds like Rabbi Meir, meaning that because the girl goes from kitana to bogeret, because the woman goes from kitana to bogeret, she never is a nara, she's never subject to the fine. Umisavarla, but actually, does Rabbi Yehuda agree with Rabbi Meir with respect to katana? V'hamar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav. We are going to see in connection with the Mishnah below, and in a couple of days on Daf Memon Mabet, we will see that Rav Yehuda is going to say in the name of Rav that Zo Divrei Rabbi Meir, that the Mishnah that says that a minor, a kitana, is not entitled to a fine, that is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Ve'im Isa, and if in fact Rabbi Yehuda would agree with that, well then Zo Divrei Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda min ba'ilei. He should have said that it was both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So that can't be either. So obviously we need another one. So now we're going to give two possible answers. So the first is Hai Tana Savar Lak Rabbi Meir to Bechada Upalag Bechada. So it's somebody who agrees with Rabbi Meir with respect to one thing, namely that a na'ara is the only category who has the fine, and so as a result, the islandess is not able to receive the fine because she's never a na'ara, and he disagrees with him with respect to one, because he says that in fact a miyun can be done even at the age of na'ara, like Rabbi Yehuda. So as a result, we end up with now a third opinion that we've essentially combined the two opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir in a way that actually works. So, all right, so that's one possibility. And then Ravram Amar says essentially now the fourth possibility, and he says, my mima enes, what is it? We're going to change what we mean by mima enes. When we said in the Brisa that mima enes is not, what did we say the words exactly, right? So hamima enes ein la lo knas v'lo pitui. What do we mean by that? Haru'uya l'ma'in, meaning it wasn't actually meant to tell us that specifically a girl who performs miyun, but rather anybody who could at that age be somebody who performs miyun, that's who's not going to get it. Meaning, like Rabbi Meir in the Brisa that we cited, when is miyun the possible thing to do? Only until shtei saros, only until the age of maturity, only until the girl becomes a na'ara. And so as a result, the point is not to say specifically one who refuses, but rather one who's at the age of refusal. So the Gemara asks, one second, Belisne Katana, let the Gemara just say Katana, or let the Brisa just say Katana. So Kasha, yeah, all right, it's a little bit difficult. And Tosfos points out here that actually, one potential answer is that the Gemara wants to teach, or that Brisa wants to teach us two things. Wants to teach us, one, that the age of miyun is up to 12. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Wants to teach us that this Brisa agrees with Rabbi Meir, and it wants to teach us that a girl does not get paid the fine. Also agreeing with Rabbi Meir that she doesn't get the fine except when she's the age of a na'ara. Okay, so now we've explained item number 2 from of the statements in the Brisa. And so now we go to the next statement. The next statement was specifically about islandess. So again, we had posed a potential conflict between islandess and miyun, but now we're going to talk about islandess specifically. And we're going to, and that will lead us to jump to another potential contrast. So islandess ain lo knas v'lo pitui. Well, one second. Uraminhu hachareshes va'ashota va'islandess yesh lahen knas. We have a Brisa that seems to disagree completely with our Brisa. Our Brisa said she doesn't get the fine, and this Brisa says she does get the fine. Well, one second. What kind of conflict do you see here? Ha Rabbi Meir, ha Rabbanan. We have two different opinions. And so Rebbe Meir is the one who says that only a girl who's a Na'ara can receive the fine. And so as a result, when our brisa says an islandess doesn't get the fine, it's like Rebbe Meir. And when we have this brisa that says that an islandess does get the fine, well, that's consistent with the Rabbanan who say that even a Ketana can get the fine.
She's not actually getting the fine, is she? I mean,
no, she's not getting her father, meaning that the fine is associated with her.
Okay.
All right. So now in second, but if we're going to answer that answer, which seems pretty obvious given the teaching that we've done, well then udikarile makarila. Well, what kind of question were you asking? So the Gemara explains, Mishum de Islay lamimra achrisei ilave. He really wanted to ask another question. So what's the other question? So the other question is to pose a conflict, not with respect to islandess, but with respect to the Cherish and the Shota. So let's take a look and we'll see a second. So again, this one says a Cherish and a Shota does get a Knas. And now we're going to see a different opinion that says that they do not. Ha-Chereshes v'ha-Shota v'ha-Bogeres v'ha-Mukas eitz ein lehen tainas besulim hasuma v'islandess yesh lehem tainas besulim. So now we're not even talking about the fine for violation, but we're talking about whether or not there's a claim with respect to lost virginity, meaning when the morning after, when the husband says, that there was no signs, so do they have the right to sign? So we see in one place, a cherish and a shota, there is a claim about virginity, and in another brisa we see that there is not such a claim. And continuing on in that brisa, Sumchas Omer Mishum Rebbe Meir Suma Ein La Tainas Besulim. A blind person also does not have the right to make the claim of virginity cannot be made against her. Okay, so Amar of Sheshes Lo Kasha Ha Rabbi Gamliel Ha Rabbi Yoshua. So now hearkening back to the end of the first parak and to the beginning of the second parak, we remember that there was a debate between Rabbi Gamliel, who always would believe the woman who had a defensive claim and allow her to collect her ksuva, and Rabbi Yoshua, who said no. How do we know to trust her? We don't know anything. We don't have any information from her, and so as a result, we're not going to necessarily believe her. So as a result, we can say that when we have the first brisa, which mentions that a cherish and a shota do have tainas besulim, so that is according to Rabbi Yoshua, because Rabbi Yoshua is the one who says that we won't necessarily believe the woman. Whereas the second version, when we don't have that claim, that would be like Rabbi Gamliel. Well, Amar deshamas la Rabbi Gamliel heika de katainehu. But 1 second, when does Rabbi Gamliel say his statement that we believe her? We believe her when she makes a claim that something happened. When she makes the claim that she got injured by a piece of wood. But but are we going to listen when she doesn't make a claim? So yes, we are going to listen, because Kavan de Amar Rabbi Gamliel mehemna, because Rabbi Gamliel says that we believe her. Kagonzo psach la'ilemhu. Right? We're in this kind of case, we are going to open our mouths to help the mute, meaning that when it comes to somebody who is either a chereshes or a shota, so in those situations, we'll speak up for her because she isn't able to speak up for herself. So one of the things that we categorized was a bogeres ein la tainas besulim, but that seems very odd. V'ha'amar Rav bogeres nasnan la laila harishon. Rav has said that in fact we allow a bogeres her entire first night, right? So the reason that presumably a bogeres you can't make a claim about lack of virginity is because presumably there's no bleeding from the hymen for a bogeres. But at the same time, Rav says that any bleeding that exists, we assume comes from the hymen for the entire first night. So as a result, there is bleeding from a bogeres' hymen.
What's the definition of a bogeret here?
A bogeret is just 12 and a half and above. assuming a normal maturity process, it's anybody who is
Okay.
12 and a half.
Right, who's presumably a virgin.
Who, yes, we're assuming that she's a virgin. This is not a question about her virginity status, her actual virginity status. It's just about the fact that maybe there's a reason that she doesn't have blood. And so as a result, we don't want the husband to say, look, there's no blood. What am I going to do? It must be that she slept around on me. We're going to tell him, you can't make that claim because she's a bogeres. Now, we have to clarify that, and that's what we're going to do right now. So in Tinus Damim. So now we're going to differentiate between two claims that we saw earlier. If, in fact, the husband is making a claim about the absence of blood, well, hakinami. So then, fine, there's no blood. But hakabamayaskinan, in Tinus Pesach Pasua. So the point is that where is it that we're assuming that the claim? So that then the claim is associated with the fact that she is, that the opening is more open than, and we had this discussion previously, more opening than one would be expecting. And so as a result, it seems it's more than just that there isn't any bleeding, that, it's other signs of non-virginity. Exactly. And so other signs of non-virginity, is what we potentially, I guess there are two ways to read this, whether the signs of no, so the thing that we cannot claim is, we're not going to allow, so that we're going to say that when we say that the claim of is not a valid claim, that's talking about just saying, oh, it seemed like it was too open. But we would allow, and we would enable the claim in connection with blood. That we do assume that, in fact, based on Rav's statement, that a bogeres who is a virgin would have bleeding. And so as a result, if there was no bleeding, so then that claim would be permitted. But effectively, in the way that we're understanding this, and which I believe is according to Rashi, that we'll say that in fact the claim of Pesach Pasua we will not allow. That's the claim that we will not allow if a man marries a woman that is a bogeres. So and that on some level makes sense.
So
we will allow the no blood claim. That exactly. That's exactly right. Exactly right. Now, of course, well, until here from that essentially forever, but then she will have the ability to claim back, mukat eitz, that she was, that some kind of accident occurred, and so as a result, that's why she didn't have bleeding. So now we reference the statement of Sumkus, right? So Sumkus had said in the name of Rabbi Meir that in fact, Sumkus Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir, Suma Ein Latinus Pusulim, that a blind woman doesn't get that claim either. So my time into Sumkus, what's the reason of Sumkus? So Amar Rabbi Zera, because she's gonna, she's gonna fall. She's not gonna see where she's going. She's gonna fall. She'll injure herself, and that will result in the loss of her hymen. Well, kulanami chabute mechabte, but any woman could have that happen to her. Well, yes, that is true that any woman could, but kula roas umaros leima. If in fact that were to happen and they were to have hymenal bleeding from when they were a young girl, they'll go and tell their mom about it. And so, but zo aino roa ve'aino mara leima. But a blind girl won't see that in fact she had bled. And as a result, she won't necessarily show to her mom. And so as a result, there will not be associated with the girl the ability and the flexibility to say, hey, this in fact was what happened, that the girl was a mukat eitz. And so the bottom line is that what we see here is that the Gemara is trying to provide a defensive argument for women who might have a reason for not having bleeding from the hymen. Okay, so the next piece of, and now we go back to the brisa that we cited at the very beginning of today, and we said hayotzis mishum shem ra ein lak lo knas lo pitoy, right? That a woman doesn't get who goes out because the husband accuses her of having had premarital relations, she doesn't get the knas and she doesn't get pitui. She doesn't get for being seduced. Well, one second, hayotzis mishum shemra baskilahi. That's a woman who gets stoned if in fact we prove that in fact she is had relations with somebody else. So no. So Amar Rav Shesha says hachikamer. No, we're going to change the category. When we say the hayotzis mishum shemra, it doesn't mean that she's getting divorced because of a bad name, but rather misha yatsa aleha shemra biyaldusa. Somebody who just has a bad reputation. Ein la lo knas v'lo pitui. She can't have a fine or the penalty for being seduced. For what? Meaning while she was young, while she was a young girl. So Amar of Papa Shmamina Haishtara Ria Lo Magbinan Life Bay. And similarly, based on this, we can say that a contract that also not only can you not collect for a woman that has a reputation, but similarly, a contract that has a bad reputation also shouldn't be able to be used to collect. Well, hey, Kidami, how are we going to compare it? If you just say that there's a rumor, that it's a forged document to kavasa, hacha denafak Allah kala diznai. So what would be the corresponding case? The corresponding case would be a woman who has, again, a bad reputation, and it's just the rumors about her. Well, but Bahama Rabba Yatzala Shem Mizana Be'ir Ain Choshishin La. We don't pay any attention to just plain rumors. You need something more. So Ella, so therefore we're going to say it's got to be Da'asu Beitreva Amri Lididhu Tiva Asani. Two people Be'isura. That two people come and say that she tried to solicit us. And therefore, so that if that's the case with respect to the woman, so the kavasa hacha, so the corresponding case in connection with the contract would be the asu beitreva amri lididahu amr lahu zaifali, and because two people came and said that the guy asked, please forge for me this document. Well, Bishlam Mahasam, it makes sense with respect to, and now here's a true understanding of human nature. It makes sense with respect to her that in fact, that we should assume that she's not a virgin because shchichi perutzim. There are lots of men who will take advantage of a loose woman. So as a result, we can make that assumption. But Elahacha, are you going to say that just because this guy tried to find, and we had two honest people who refused to engage in forgery, that imhu hukzak kol Yisrael mihosku. So fine, just because this guy who actually tried to solicit the guys wanted to be a bad guy and do a false contract, are we sure that he's going to be successful in finding somebody? So Hakanami, actually, yes, we can assume not that necessarily he's successful in finding two other forgers, but Kavan to Kamahadar Aziyufe, because he's going around searching out for forgery, Amar Zayufe Zaife the Kasab. He'll figure out, you know what, I can forge it on my own. So I'll forge it on my own, and that will be fine. All right, so now let's take a look at the next Mishnah. And again, the next Mishnah continues this discussion of, although narrower, situation of cases where we say that there is no fine. And again, these cases will either deal with situations where we assume that the woman is not a virgin, or with situations where the penalty is actually death. And so that's why in these situations, because again, our prior Mishnah was according to the viewpoint that said that the only situation where you don't get a fine is when there's the death penalty involved, based on the kumle b'derabba mine. So the elu she'ein lehen knas, these are the women who don't get a knas. Habal hagiyoris v'ala shvuya v'ala shifcha sheniftu shenistairu v'nishtakaru yiserus albanos shlosh shanim b'yom echad. So if a convert, captive, or slave is freed after the age of 3, well, then we assume that it is somebody that they engaged in marital relations, and as a result, there will not be any fine associated with them, because again, they engaged in it after the age of 3, and so as a result, there's no repair possible at that point, because it doesn't repair on its own, as would happen before the age of 3. Rabbi Yehuda Omer shvuya sheniftes harehi b'kedushasa. No, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says no. a captive, she remains in her state of purity, afalpi shigadola. Even if she's an adult, even if she's older than 3, we'll give her that credit. Okay, so abal bito, and then what are the other categories? So if one violates his daughter, albas bito, on his daughter's daughter, albas beno, on his son's daughter, albas ishto, on his wife's daughter, albas bena, on his son's daughter, on her son's daughter, right? Albas, her, his wife's son's daughter, albas bita, on his wife's daughter's daughter. Ein lahen knas. All of these don't get a knas. Menashem is chayav b'nafsho, because in each case the person is actually chayav for the death penalty. Shemisa son they based in, because they get the death again, and their death penalty is imposed by court. The kol hamischayav b'nafsho ein mishalem mamon, and anybody who is subject to the death penalty doesn't pay money. Shneamar the lo yiyeh ason. Right. So now this is a puzzle that we've been citing over and over. And in this version, we're saying, what does it mean? Lo yason clearly means if there's not going to be an imposition of the death penalty, then there's going to be a punishment, a monetary punishment. Otherwise, we won't. So we'll stop here and we will pick up with the Gemara, God willing, tomorrow. Okay.
Quick question.
Please.
Yeah. What was this thing about Shachor and Lavan back there?
So the question is,
something?
It is basically, it is a way for the Gemara to describe a greater number of hairs than 2.
So what is that actually relates to the color of the hair?
No, I don't know that it relates to the color of the hair, literally meaning, obviously if your hair isn't black, then but obviously most Jewish women have dark colored hair, but certainly the point is the pubic area, sufficiently darkened as a result of the hair.
Okay, all right, I got it. All right.
So it's a sign of maturity. That's the intention.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, I understood. Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you. Be well. Have a great day.